Did Jesus really rise from the dead? Subscribe, click that bell for all things Bible. Of all of the topics that we've covered here on Bible Central, this is without a doubt the most important. I mean, if Jesus Christ didn't rise from the dead, this whole Christian thing is absolutely pointless and ridiculous. As the Apostle Paul said in his first letter to the Corinthians,
"But if there be no resurrection of the dead, then is Christ not risen. And if Christ be not risen, then is our preaching vain, and your faith is also vain."
You don't know what Paul sounded like. Needless to say, the resurrection of Jesus Christ is extremely important to our faith. But since the Bible says that he rose from the dead, there's nothing to worry about. But what about all the Christians who don't believe the Bible? I know it sounds kind of stupid when you say it out loud, but there are quite a few alternative theories to a bodily resurrection. So, in the spirit of fairness and tolerance, we will be going through each of these theories to determine their validity. It's important to note that even secular scholars agree that the tomb was in fact empty. So, those who don't believe that a person could rise again from the dead have endeavored to find a different reason for why the body wasn't there. Bear in mind that there are in some cases tens of people who believe in these theories. So, as we discuss them, let's be adult about this. The theories are not amusing in any way, so please, try not to laugh. First thought of in 1907 by Kersop Lake, this theory says that as the women were going to the tomb of Jesus early in the morning before the sun rose, they got all turned around in the dark and went to the wrong one. Now, this theory doesn't address why the women forgot where they buried the most important person they had ever known, nor does it say why they went to the wrong tomb when Jesus wasn't buried in a public graveyard, but the private tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. Or even why the disciples didn't, check to make sure it was the right tomb before they went telling everybody. But all in all, I think this is a perfectly logical theory. But wait! The disciples did go to the tomb later that day and check. And how exactly would the women forget which tomb it was whenever there were guards stationed outside of it? And if it was the wrong tomb and the disciples started going around Jerusalem preaching that Jesus had risen from the dead, why wouldn't the Pharisees, or the Romans for that matter, be like, "Hey guys, he's in the tomb over here"? This theory from the 1900s proposes that Joseph of Arimathea. This shouldn't be that difficult. It says that Josephus Arminius took the body and ran off with it. Now, there is absolutely no evidence for this in the Bible, Jewish writings, or other historical accounts, but that doesn't disqualify it from being a valid theory.
Wrong.
Some experts actually say that because there's no evidence for this theory, that proves it's true because the early church must have been destroying all the evidence to cover their tracks. This is actually possible because there's another account where after Jesus feeds the 5,000, he then invents rainbow sherbet for dessert and has it delivered on the backs of green elephants. Now, there's no evidence for this whatsoever, and that proves that it's true because somebody somewhere must have hidden it, and if you believe otherwise, then you're stupid. The swoon theory is by far the most popular alternative theory to the resurrection that there is, so we're going to give it special attention. The belief is that Jesus didn't really die on the cross, he just passed out, or swooned. Oh! Then in the cold environment of the tomb, he resuscitated, rolled the stone away, and then appeared to his disciples.
You're alive. I'm alive.
A few things about this. Actually, no, a lot of things about this. First off, not only does the Bible say Jesus was dead, it says he was so dead that the Roman soldiers who killed people all the time didn't even bother to break his legs, opting instead to run him through with a spear. These soldiers took great pride in the art of killing. They knew what a dead body looked like. Also, they weren't allowed to leave the crucifixion site until their victim had expired. If their victim did survive, then they themselves would face execution. So they had an invested interest in making sure they performed the job to the utmost of their ability. So I'm going to defer to the experts on this one. But let's say for argument's sake that Jesus did swoon on the cross, completely fooling the Roman soldiers whose entire job description was nail people to wood until they are dead. Then, Jesus would have to recover without water or medical aid and roll away his own tombstone. For a little background, Jewish tombs in the 1st century were usually carved into the side of a hill and had an opening only a few feet high, so you would have to kneel down to enter. Inside, there might be places for 2 or 3 bodies, as well as shelves for clay jars. So when one of your loved ones died, you would place their remains in a body slot, then after a few years of decomposing, you would return, gather the bones, and place them in a jar on the shelf. The opening of the tomb would then be sealed by the iconic rolling stone weighing around 300 pounds and resembling a miller's wheel. The stone would roll along in a trench downhill until it came to its resting place, so it couldn't just fall over. So Jesus would have to regain consciousness after being brutally beaten and nailed to a cross for 6 hours and roll a 300-pound rock uphill on his hands and knees. Not to mention that he would have to push the rock from the side for the first bit. That may not sound hard, but do you know what else weighs around 300 pounds? The average refrigerator. So, tomorrow, take your refrigerator and put it at the base of a hill. Then start pushing it, but not from behind. No. Push it from the side. There's no leverage. Oh, and while you're at it, get down on your hands and knees and try it like that.
Not a great plan.
And did I mention he was tightly wound up in cloth, making movement nearly impossible? But the real problem with the swoon theory is the disciples' reaction to seeing Jesus. A mere weeks after they had seen him nailed to a cross, they were boldly preaching that he had risen from the dead. Ask yourself this: if Jesus had staggered into the room where the disciples were, covered in blood, gasping for air and wincing in pain, what would their reaction be?
Your friend here is only mostly dead.
Would they really think that this pitiful man in front of them that so obviously needs medical attention had conquered death? Of course not. At best, they think he barely escaped it. Hardly someone to base a global movement on. Now, we've gone into this in detail, but for a summary, let me hand it over to my good friend, Brother Bill Britt.
So you say Jesus swooned on the cross. He didn't die? After they had beat him, plucked a beard from his face, put a poisonous crown of thorns on his head, nailed him to a cross, 6-inch spikes in his hands, 9-inch spike in his feet. He was hanging there for 6 hours, shed every drop of his blood, and he simply swooned. That's the most ludicrous thing I could think of today.
Short, succinct, to the point. Maybe I should have just done that. This theory is actually in the Bible itself, that Jesus' disciples snuck over and stole the body while the guards slept.
And when they were assembled with the elders, and had taken counsel, they gave large money unto the soldiers, saying, Say ye, his disciples came by night, and stole him away while we slept.
Don't ask how the guards knew what was going on while they slept in order to report the story, or how the disciples were able to make that rock be extra quiet while they moved it out of the way. Those minor details, they're not important. Not to mention it was against Jewish law to approach a dead body, so not only would the disciples have to disregard that rule, but also Joseph of Joseph. Also, while Jesus was still alive, his disciples ran away in fear. But only a few days after he's been tortured and brutally executed, they're suddenly bold enough to go and steal his body from the Romans?
What?
Oh, and remember those soldiers who were in charge of crucifixions and what would happen if they didn't do a good job? Yeah, well, the same would apply to the guards. If they were caught sleeping on the job, then they would be beaten to death. This also eliminates the idea that the soldiers were paid off by the disciples, because what amount of money is worth being rocked to sleep? I mean, stoned to death.
$1 million.
Once again, there is something that even secular scholars agree on, and that is the tremendous rise of faith in the disciples. They truly, honestly believed that Jesus Christ had risen from the dead. Most of the disciples died horrible deaths. Why? If they knew that Jesus had not risen, why would they be willing to lay down their lives in his name? Now, this theory proposes that the body of Jesus completely decomposed and disintegrated into nothing in a period of 36 hours.
You serious?
Seriously, this might be my favorite one yet. The man who came up with this theory was the appropriately named Leslie Weatherhead. He said that it was possible that upon death, the body of Jesus became gaseous, dissolved, and evaporated between the cracks of the tomb, hair, bones, teeth, and all. If you can honestly believe that, then why on earth are you having trouble with a bodily resurrection? Now, this theory actually does have some support today amongst Jehovah's Witnesses who believe in a spiritual resurrection rather than a physical one. So why did Jesus still have nail prints in his hands? Can you drive nails through a spirit's hands? Do spirits even have hands? Wait a minute, there's more of these? So this theory, suggested by a guy named B.H. Streeter, says that Jesus died, went to heaven, and then telegraphed himself into the minds of his disciples back on the earth. Huh? Laying aside how completely immoral it would be for Jesus to engage in this type of deception, if he's powerful enough to telegraph himself into the minds of people on the earth to the point where they actually think they're touching him, why wouldn't he just, I don't know, rise from the dead?
When does it end?
Okay, so this theory says that the women really wanted to see Jesus, so they just imagined that they did, and they went on their merry way, told the disciples, and they all lived in fairyland together.
That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Let's break this down biblically, shall we? You know, the exact thing these fools should have done before they came up with all this garbage? Too much? Alright, in order to see something that isn't really there, usually you need to have a certain amount of expectation. You have to want it. But when the women went to the tomb that morning, they were going with spices to lay over a dead body. They weren't expecting to see a risen Jesus at all. Even after angels appear and tell them that he's risen, Mary still doesn't believe. She thinks somebody took off with him. It isn't till Jesus actually talks to her that she believes he's alive. If you actually read the Bible, then it's clear that people like Mary, Peter, and Thomas weren't expecting Jesus to be alive. In fact, they believed the opposite, and it took quite a bit of convincing for them to think otherwise. And what about Saul of Tarsus, otherwise known as the Apostle Paul? When he got up that morning to go to Damascus, he absolutely wasn't expecting to see Jesus alive. And side note, in the first century, women were not considered to be a reliable source of information. Sorry, ladies. But there are some people who believe that this account, or at least parts of it, are fabricated. So if you were just making up this whole story, why would you pick women as the first people to find the empty tomb? People of the time would be less likely to believe it. Maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what happened, and the writers of the Gospels were telling it like it was. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for subscribing and clicking that bell, and oh, come on! Alright, last one, I promise, but I couldn't pass this one up. Yes, this theory is real, but not for the normal reasons. You see, the leader of the Montanist, early church father Tertullian, who lived from 155 AD to 220 AD, put forth this theory as a joke. But today, some people don't realize that, and so they write actual articles refuting this alternative resurrection theory. Basically, the theory is that the gardener stole the body of Jesus because he didn't want people to mess up his plants. No, really. The thing is, Tertullian is clearly joking. In his writing, Disputaculus, he's talking about what he would say to a person who had doubted Christ their entire life and then unexpectedly stood before Christ on the day of judgment.
This is your carpenter's son, your harlot's son, your Sabbath breaker, your Samaritan, your demon-possessed. This is he whom ye bought from Judas. This is he who was struck with reeds and fists, dishonored with spittle, and given a draught of gall and vinegar. This is he whom his disciples have stolen secretly, that it might be said, he has risen. Or the gardener abstracted that his lettuces might not be damaged by the crowds of visitors.
So he's mocking the various insults given to Jesus during his life, and all the ridiculous alternative resurrection theories that existed even in Tertullian's day. With modern examples, it might sound something like this.
This is your swooning savior, your stolen corpse, your telegraphing spirit, your figment of imagination, the incredible disintegrating deity.
His message is clear. Christ is risen, and one day, you will see him face to face. Well, that is finally all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe, click that notification bell so you never miss another upload, and remember, don't trust what I say, trust what he said. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching, and a special thanks to brother Bill Britt for hanging out in this ridiculous internet video. He's one of my favorite preachers and the president of Compel Outreach International. I strongly urge you to go to compeloutreach.org and make a donation to his incredible ministry.